Alright, today we're going to start Chapter 7, which is the skeletal system, one of my favorites. Bones are very active living tissues. Considering the way that they are dividing, cells are constantly dividing and replacing old bone tissue. So bones are active and they are living. Your entire bone will be replaced within, and it takes a long time, so it would be many years, but all cells are constantly being replaced. They're living, they're very active. Each bone is made up of several types of tissues that we'll look at. Bone, of course, being the most important one. Cartilage, dense connective tissue, blood vessels that will run down the center, nervous tissue. Therefore, your bones are considered organs. So each bone is considered a separate organ. Bone functions include, most importantly, probably muscle attachment, which helps for movement. Protection and support of soft tissues. Your rib cage is very important for protecting your heart and lungs. Your spine is going to protect your spinal cord. So lots of protection. Produces blood cells, so very important, especially red blood cell production. And it stores inorganic salts and calcium. So functions, muscles or movement, that would be one. Protection, support, blood cell formation, and storage. So those would be the main functions of the bone. The actual structure of the bone, they're classified different ways. A long bone, it basically describes the appearance. So if I'm looking at your arm, the humerus would be a long bone, the radius would be a long bone, and the ulna would be a long bone. In your wrist, the tiny little bones that make up your wrist would be considered short bones, so they're small in size. Ankles, that would also be found in your ankle bones. Sesamoid are called round bones, and the most common one is your patella. If you sit and relax, your kneecap can move because it doesn't have a joint. It's simply held there by tendons and ligaments. So sesamoid is round and usually has a little bit more movement. Flat bones, your ribs are very thin and flat. Scapula, the shoulder blade is very flat. And then your skull bones, if you were to open and look inside of your skull bones are fairly thin and flat. Irregular bones would be something like your vertebrae. They are odd shaped. So vertebrae, here would be a cow vertebrae. Very odd shape. It's not long, it's not flat, they're not short. So irregular vertebrae, and then your facial bones, like your nose and your cheeks, would be examples. Parts of a long bone. So if I'm looking at a long bone, the epiphyseus is the ends. So this would be an epiphyseus, and this would be an epiphyseus of my humerus bone. Articular cartilage then is going to cover these ends, and that's very important for movement. The cartilage is going to protect the bones so they don't rub against other bones. So the cartilage is a form of protection. The shaft of the bone then is the diaphysis, and that's the long structured part of it. Surrounding the outside of the bone is the periosteum. Peri means outside, osteo deals with bone. So the periosteum is going to be the covering on the outside of the bone. If I cut this bone in half, the inside of the bone is a cavity. So here, and obviously this is a dead bone, it is no longer living tissue, the yellow marrow that was on the inside is now gone. So the hollow cavity is the medullary cavity, And that is lined with another lining on the inside that would be the endosteum. Endo means inside, it's the lining on the inside. And if this were a living bone, it would be filled with marrow, and mostly yellow marrow that would fill the center of that bone. So epiphyseous ends, diaphysis is the shaft or the long part, periosteum outside lining, endosteum inside lining. Bone shape makes it possible to function. There's going to be little processes where muscles attach, openings or grooves. Perfect example. If I look at the inside of my skull, there's a depression right here where your pituitary gland is going to sit. There's an opening here for the spinal cord. There is cavities here for your eyes. Bony processes where muscles are going to attach. So a bone has a shape, but then it also has other parts to it. So a process would be like a bump that sticks out. A depression is where something is going to sit inside, and those would be examples. Compact bone and spongy bone are the two main types. And here again, if I look at a large bone, looking at a beef bone, the compact bone is usually the shaft part. It is very hard, it's very thick, it's dense, it's compact. That's where the name comes from. Typically that's going to make up the wall of the diaphysis. The epiphyseous are going to be filled with spongy bone, so it looks like little sponges, and I can actually take my fingernail and poke and kind of break that. It's not nearly as strong as compact bone. Because it's not as strong or dense, it helps to reduce the weight of the skeleton so that you guys can actually move and your bones aren't too heavy to carry around. Spongy bone, here, every little branching bony plate is called trabeculae. If I look inside, I'm going to find that on the ends, like I said. Also, inside of most of your bones, there will be some spongy bone on the inside of your medullary cavity. So compact bone and then a small layer of spongy bone, and all those little grooves or plates that stick out are called trabeculae. Here's a diagram, one that I expect you to know. Proximal and distal deal with where the bone is at. So if you remember from chapter 1, proximal means close to attachment. So my proximal part of my humerus would be where my bone is going to attach. So this would be my proximal end because it's where the joint is at, closest to my body. Distal end of the bone is going to be farther away from that attachment. So then if I move down to my radius, this would be the proximal end of my radius because it's closest to the point of attachment. And that would be the distal end because it's further away. And here it just shows the diagram. You can see periosteum's on the outside. Here's the yellow marrow filling in the cavity. Blood vessels are going to be on the inside. Epiphyseal plates we'll talk about quite a bit in the next section, and that is the scientific term for growth plates. So this and this would be a growth plate, which is a much more common term than epiphyseal plate. So make sure that you know this diagram. If I look at bones under a microscope, the bone cells, osteocytes, bone cells is what that means. They are located in lacunae, which are basically the openings that hold it. We'll show a picture of that. And they're going to lie in circles, and in the circle is going to be a central or haversian canal. And that's usually where the blood vessels are going to be. Osteocytes, bone cells pass nutrients and gases through little canals or canaliculi. And then that outer or extracellular matrix of the bone is mostly made up of collagen, and then that's where the inorganic salts and calcium that are stored will be. Collagen is important because it provides strength and resilience, and the inorganic salts are going to actually make your bones hard and help them to provide support so they're not so easily crushed. Typically, when you break a bone, it's a crack, it's a fracture, it's not the whole bone is crushed because your bones are very, very strong. In compact bone, these bone cells and outside layers are organized into osteons, and basically each osteon is cemented together, and we'll look at a picture of